So are we ready, Niles?
We're ready.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Before we begin tonight's very full agenda, the council would ask that you join us in observing a moment of silence in honor of Frank Carell. As most of you know, Frank served on the council for a number of years and on the ethics or elections and ethics committee after that. He was passionate about local government and was often one of only a handful of people at our in-person council meetings. He will be missed. Okay, so tonight, before we begin resident comments, I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded. So if you do choose to speak, please identify yourself and your street for the record. And also please observe our two-minute rule for your comments, whether you choose to speak at the beginning or the end, not both. And unless you must use the chat function to communicate, please limit the use of chat to notify Niles if you're experiencing feedback or somebody needs to be unmuted. But otherwise, please don't use chat. It's very distracting.
And also ask everybody to
Mute your mics.
mute themselves when they're not talking.
Yes, please. Good point. Okay, so would any residents like to speak at this point? Okay, Mark.
It's Keith Allen talking.
Hey, Keith.
And I might as well jump in here with the weather report.
We need that weather report.
Okay, we were in the 50s today. You won't see that again probably for at least a couple of more weeks. And some winter weather that we've not been very used to so far. It'll be moving in here by the weekend with a lot of wind on Saturday and maybe some snow and ice on Monday. And there'll be probably a couple or three times next week that we'll have to be dealing with that. Not bitter cold, but certainly unlike what we've experienced. So be prepared for that. Susan, you sort of beat me to the draw here on the acknowledgement of Frank. I just wanted to say a few words since I knew him since 1982 and he was a neighbor of mine. And he was an outstanding person. And he did epitomize good citizenship as well as he had a very caring, he was a very helpful neighbor. And he did serve on the council and for years on the ethics and election committee. And he was a gentleman of honesty, sincerity, integrity, good character, which is something that some things we need more of today. It's a better community because of him. And he loved our village and especially its dogs. He made it a better place for all of us to live. And I wanted to say something about this humble and good-hearted man. And that's all. And my time is up. I thank you for yours.
Thank you very much, Keith.
Right.
Lauren Beal.
Yeah, this is Lauren Beal of Delafield Street. I just also wanted to share my sadness at the loss of Frank Carell. I had the pleasure of having drinks with him once at La Ferme and hearing all about his incredible life. And I actually was hoping that we might consider having some kind of a public honoring of him, much in the same way we have for other citizens who have committed themselves to service of the village, and would hope that the council might consider that. I wanted to raise that. I also, on a different note, wanted to commend the council for the modifications to the tree ordinance that were circulated. I think that they really took into account number of resident concerns. Actually, one of the concerns that Frank himself had raised on the listserv, I think, was very, very well addressed in the proposed ordinance by focusing on sediment control permit requests as the trigger for the which, one of the concerns was that this not be just for anybody, but that we really think about people who are coming in and doing major development, which, could be a resident. But I think that was a very graceful way of addressing that. And I wanted to commend the council for that. There are a number of other things in that ordinance that I think are really positive movements in the right direction. So just wanted to speak my support for that. I won't be able to stay for the whole meeting this time, but thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thanks, Lauren. Any other resident comments?
I have Holly. Can I talk?
Oh, well, sure. You and Mark can duke it out.
Oh no, somebody else can go. I don't mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm not duking.
It's what we like to see.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so a month ago, I proposed the formation and approved by the council of a public safety committee. I didn't do a very good job of presenting it, and I'm taking another shot tonight. And I hope that I will have addressed everybody's concerns. The purpose of the public safety committee is to address a breadth of community, as I envision, is to address a breadth of community concerns about crime, tolerance, and health. We didn't invent this idea. Chevy Chase Village has one. Bowie has one. They're all citizen-run, and Councilman Friedison is building a COVID-related community organization to help people. So the breadth of the charter that we propose is that we would function as a clearinghouse to collect, evaluate, and share raw data, so everybody could read it as they see fit, and provide our analysis and identified options that might be used to address these issues. So, and of course, we would do all of this, and we would present this to the community, and we present it to the council, and the community members would decide how they want to use this information, and the council would decide how it wants to use this information. We'd work with guardrails, and that we would have some public interfacing with law enforcement and public health agency, but we would be, while we would in our presence be representatives of the village and how we conduct ourselves, we would have no authority to represent the position of village members or the council or the government of Martin's Addition, because we're not elected. So why do we want to do this? And I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. COVID is one of the things that's driving it, and that is that COVID is becoming a struggle for us all after so long. The county rollout and the state rollouts are not being effective, and we're all sort of signing up and trying to get reservations for shots, and then we're told we can't, and then we're told we can, then we're told we can't. Nobody's telling us about the impact of these shots because they're different, especially for different ages. There's a wealth of information, and none of us really have the ability to get this information ourselves. It needs to be done in some collaborative way. We think that that leads to an analysis which we would present, and information we present, our advocacy of best practices for persons and families, for the community, and then you all will decide what we do. So the other thing, the next thing I think drives this is crime. I used to practice criminal law for many years, and then I graduated to like better stuff, quite frankly. But I'll tell you what I know. We've been discovered, okay? The ransacking of cars is not just a random kid thing. It's a way people look at the neighborhood, all right? Last night, my neighbor, Don Goldberg's car was taken for a 200-something mile joyride. Fortunately, it wasn't destroyed. All of that is showing that people are discovering the value of coming to Martin's Addition and taking stuff. Now, in addition to that, today in the listserv, there was a discussion of people sort of being suspiciously appearing to pretend like they're solicitors, and then when asked questions, killing the conversation and leaving. We all know what that is. That's scoping out opportunities. We've been discovered. And unless we do something to discourage this, it's going to increase. Now, the last thing that it motivates me and us and the people I've worked with is tolerance. I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but we know that the destruction of campaign signs and Black Lives Matter signs and the dumping of poop on people who had those signs in front of their houses is unacceptable in our community. So the purpose, what I would hope that the safety committee would do is bring us together, allow us people to decide what they want to do in a collaborative fashion and to do it. So how would this work? And I'm working close to the end, I promise. We'd start out with need studies. We have some ideas, those of us who've been working on this together, but you do too. And so there would be a need study, there would be a reach out to the community. We do one right away to stand up the committee, and then we do them annually or whatever seems to be appropriate. Then once the needs are identified, we talk about priorities, and then we would collect information about these things. We would liaison with law enforcement and public health and those folks like I talked about. We would try to identify resources or advice or counsel from them that would help us deal with the issues that the community decides are important. And then we would present it to you all. And then families would do what they think is appropriate. The council would do what's appropriate. And we would advocate best practices, but that doesn't mean you're going to listen to us, which is fine. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell. I wish I had more time, but I want to be respectful of the procedures that you've set here as the council. And so I'm available to answer any questions that are asked. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Would anyone else like to speak?
I have my hand up. It's Holly.
Okay, Holly Worthington, right.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mark. I just like to ask for several things. This is just short. One, that the council adopt the position that before an ordinance is proposed, that's not minor in nature, but anything significant like the tree ordinance, the ethics ordinance, the safety committee is not an ordinance, but the sign ordinance, any of those things, that we have a public forum for that purpose. That's number one. Number two, I think we really need a safety committee, and if we don't approve having one, the members of the community will just make their own. And I think it'd just be better to have the council involved in that. But the next step would be, if we don't approve one, is for us to just make our own. Third, I really hope that the council will consider the alternatives that have been raised in the past several meetings to the ethics ordinance, which was beautifully crafted, but so many other communities don't have that. And I really hope that we will have a public forum on just that topic before it's proposed. And lastly, I'm concerned that in several of the past meetings, that the way some of the members of the community have been spoken to doesn't make it feel like our comments are welcome. And I think that's really unfortunate. I don't think that's anyone's intention, but it has really felt that way. And I really hope we can all work, all of us, to change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak?
Bill and
Yeah.
I'm Naomi. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. My name is Naomi Nyerman, and I am on Quincy Street. I want to echo Holly's recommendations for an elections committee, also Mark Schaefer's. A safety committee. It is really vital for our village to have a coherent plan for guarding against any incursions into our community and also managing the likes of the pandemic as even though it is a temporary kind of situation. People really need information of where to go for reliable information that they can use rather than hoping to hear something from each other on listservs. Secondly, I want to encourage the council to vote for a mail-in only elections this coming May. The pandemic is not going away. We heard Fauci today. He's talking about the end of the summer. I think we need to announce that kind of policy for all mail-in voting sooner rather than later. Third, I'd like to recommend that the council delay proposing an ordinance for ethics so as to allow for a public forum that includes a lot more folks in the community to weigh in and to learn about the alternatives that nearby jurisdictions have been using. We only got that research from the lawyer for the council in the past month, and we ourselves have not had a chance to look at all the alternatives. So I really encourage the council to hold a public hearing for any ordinance that requires a major change in our legislative policies. And finally, I would like to ask the council to reconsider how minutes are recorded in reports to the community. There were oversights. There was an attachment. There was a memo that was included last time around by Paula Goldberg and Marty Langelin that was accidentally not included, and they had to reminded Niles to make sure that they attached it for the record. And there were quite a few oversights of messages that were expressed by Jeff Blander that were not included in the minute, and I am wondering why. So I hope that there's going to be a lot more adherence to comments by the residents, and that we feel more included than we have been in the past. Thank you.
Bill Lerman?
There we go. Thank you. I would like to add my voice to those who are speaking in favor of the proposed safety ordinance. I see that there's an election plan and policy on the agenda tonight. I would like to suggest that you hold off on passing anything there until we can have a community forum on that one, since I know there are concerns in the community about that one.
Oh.
But mostly what I wanted to speak to is that in the spirit of this week, when the president has called for a spirit of national unity, I think we need to take a moment to talk about how we can bring that spirit of unity here in Martin's Additions. This has been a very contentious few months. But given that spirit of reaching out that we heard about yesterday, I think we all need to think about how we can reach out to each other in this meeting and going forward. With all due respect, many of us do feel disrespected by this council, as I know many members of this council have felt disrespected as well over these last couple of months. The contentiousness that we've seen between members of this council is unseemly. The fact that we can't even agree on what should go into the minutes, I think, is unacceptable. I think a call for unity can lead to a lot of finger pointing very quickly. Who's at fault here? Well, you're the one who's not being unified here. My dad used to tell me a joke. Mother says to her kid, Billy, stop pulling that cat's tail. Billy says, I'm just holding the cat's tail. The cat is doing all the pulling. So in that spirit, I would like to start and say that I was one of the first ones to speak up on the sign ordinance and the ethics ordinance. And if anything I said was offensive to members of the council, or if anybody took what I said personally, I apologize for that. That was not my intent, but intent doesn't matter. Actions matter. So I want to take this moment to say, I'm sorry if I contributed to that atmosphere. And so as we move forward on the agenda items tonight and moving forward into the future, I think we should remember what President Biden and Kamala Harris said, Vice President Harris said to us yesterday, that there's no problem we can't solve if we work on it together. It has not felt like we're working together these last couple of months. It feels like one of us is the cat and the other's holding the tail. So I'd like to gently suggest that we find a way to let go of that, to take a breath, to reset, and to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry Wasson?
Yeah, I'd like to, I very much agree with what Holly and Naomi were saying. And I was just curious, I'm sorry I think I missed a meeting, but Marty had come up with a proposal of a group of people getting together to develop a guidance document. Was anything ever done to encourage that or make that happen?
A guidance document?
Yeah,
For
actually,
volunteers?
Larry, they sent me a ton of material that I am now digesting and have not yet produced the final product.
Okay, well, could it be possible for them to be able to make a presentation if we're going to have a forum on this, about that? I would like to see that.
That's something the council can determine later.
Right.
I want to say, on minutes, Susan, perhaps you can fill us in, but.
I will definitely get to
Okay,
that.
good. They are not
There are a
intended
number
to
of-
be a verbatim report of everything that occurs during the meeting, but Susan will tell us what they do include.
Any other comments first?
Yes, I would like to speak if I may.
Of
This
course.
is Marty Langland from Chestnut Street. And to pick up on Larry Watson's suggestion, a whole group of people, like 15 or 20 people in the community, did give the council a proposal for a better ordinance adoption process. And we gave that to the council in writing a month or two ago, and I hope that that will get picked up. Council's done one piece of that, which is to give explanations of ordinances, but it really needs to be more of a two-way conversation to develop ordinance content for our village, because this is a self-governed village. And I think, Larry, I appreciate you bringing that up. That was one proposal that's on the table that's kind of still waiting. I also want to strongly support the safety committee. I've been really creeped out by the sort of hate message vandalism here. I think that is totally unacceptable. This is a tolerant village. We respect people here. And I appreciate what Phil said about running these meetings with respect for residents who take the time to come and take the time to send written comments, which should be included in the minute records, in the public record. So there's a lot going on here, and I appreciate the council listening carefully, because it's great for the council to give us more information about a proposed ordinance with an explanation. But I think it's really equally important for the council to listen to what community members say and to share what community members have to say with each other. This is a community conversation. It's not a one-way conversation in any means. And I think along those lines, a lot of people have expressed to me, because I was running the election committee for so many years, that the need to do a mail vote this coming May is absolutely essential. And I hope the council will vote on that tonight. On the subject of elections, there's really two stages here. One is in a vote tonight to do the vote by mail in May, just to set people's minds at ease that they're not going to have to come in person to vote. And I would note that voting by mail is also better in terms of civil rights. It's more accessible for people with disabilities and families with young kids. A lot of reasons. It's also much more efficient. There are many reasons to do a mail vote this May, the main one being public health. So please vote on that tonight, just that decision. But the election ordinance itself, I took the time to go through it pretty carefully. And last month at the council meeting, I raised some initial concerns about both the process by which those regulations were produced and the fact that many of the specific changes are new. This is not just a rerun of the old ordinance at all. And the council, said that there had been some meetings of the election committee, but there were only 2 meetings by the election committee, 2 public meetings, neither one of which discussed any of the specific changes in the regulations that are now proposed in this election ordinance document that we got at the December meeting. So I really would urge the council again to do what I recommended last month, which is to hold a public forum, or at least an election committee open meeting, so people can discuss the proposed changes in the election regulations. Some of them are quite concerning to me, and I think to other people who follow election regulations carefully. So please do an open forum on that. But tonight, just vote for the mail vote, just to set people's minds at ease. And last but not least, on the ethics ordinance, I again have suggested, like many other people have, I echo what people have said here earlier, that we really need to look at the alternatives before we proceed as a council and as a community to adopt the proposed ethic ordinance. I think the ethics committee did a good job of drafting it, but that doesn't mean you should approve it, because it had really serious implications in terms of community harm, and I'm very worried about that. So let's look at the alternatives first. I think that's just good government process. And finally, I would like to echo Phil Lerman's point about courtesy and respect. I have been very taken aback by the tone of the last 3 council meetings, and have tried personally not to contribute to that by being very matter of fact, but factual. I think that we really need to respect community input here, and I would ask the council to remember that ordinances and setting up safety committees and anything else that we do here is really a community effort. We elect the council as our representatives, but public service means listening to your community. And I thank the council for being very attentive, not just to telling us what you think, but to listening to what the residents think. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Would anyone else like to speak?
Susan, you drive a.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, how are you? Hey, hello, everybody. Steve Choram from Raymond Street. I have a couple of points and a couple of questions. And first question is just for Arthur, because you might have the facts at your fingertips. Do you recall when we used to have the village police, the Chevy Chase Village Police, who would, I guess they would lease us some patrols? Do you recall like the annual cost of that? And did the village kill that, or did we kill that program?
I can give you the cost in a few minutes if I look up my files, but the village, to refresh people's memory, Village of Martin's Addition hired for a certain number of hours a week patrols from the Chevy Chase Village Police Force. They decided on their own they did not have the resources to continue that. And so that stopped. And for a number of years, we had no patrols except the ordinary Montgomery County patrols that came through here on their own schedule. Roughly 4 or 5 years ago, we added these 2 additional policemen to come in and do 20 hours a week, which was not a lot. And we recognized that, but what we considered that we were buying was comfort. It was a comfort blanket for people. As the police told us, as the local precincts tell us, the level of crime in Chevy Chase in general is very, very low. And the level of crime in Martin's Addition was virtually zero. When Steve Schmall at a meeting raised the question whether the police patrols would pass any cost-benefit analysis, we had to say, no, it doesn't. What we're buying is a comfort blanket for people. And I think it does make people more comfortable. But if you want, in about 30 seconds, I'll look up what the cost of those patrols were.
Well, the reason I raise that is because I'm hearing about the safety commission. A general comment, because we do have the safety. The safety is provided by the county. I've had a car stolen out of my driveway that was not unlocked. It was locked. It was recovered in Washington. I had the phone number and the first name of the kid who drove it home, I guess. It was Randy. He needed a ride home and he borrowed the car. And the Metro Police don't care. Like, there's absolutely no obligation or any support for chasing down what's considered a petty crime in Washington. And so the idea to think that if we should spend money on need studies and other actions and we kind of come up with a plan, the plan's probably going to be increased police patrols, unless you want to have spotlights in all of our streets, which I'm sure nobody does. We should look at using the county resources because they do have off-duty police officers who will patrol under the county authority or on-duty police patrols. And so, you know, that's probably the best we're going to get as it relates to crime. And I'm not speaking about walking down the street or speeding, you know, cars that go through stop signs, but for crime and break-ins, that's what we should consider. But the broader point I want to make, and this is a little bit contrarian to maybe some of the other folks have been speaking tonight and in previous meetings, is that I think that there is a movement, and maybe it's because we have a lot of time to think about this, or we're at home more, or we see this more. But there seems to be kind of a movement to outstep the bounds of what the village, government should be providing. I would agree that the COVID vaccination process is flawed. I had my father vaccinated today, but it's run by the state. There is a process in place. The charter, the ordinance process in VMA exists. It's in the charter. Maybe flawed or needs to be improved, but it does exist. And then, trying to kind of expand beyond the things that we would normally do in a village, it might just encumber the village to where we can't get anything done because nobody can agree. And then my final comment would be, just a caution that I think there's a lot of people who use the private listserv as a way to voice their feelings about what the council should or should not do. And if there's not a response on the listserv from a council member, that feels like disrespect or feels like your voice is not being heard. It just, to me, is not the right forum. The right forum is meetings like this and council meetings and committee meetings that exist for the purpose of airing those thoughts or grievances. And so we should probably reduce the use of the listserv as a way to solve governmental problems and use it for what it was originally intended, which is just a community information forum about what's happening in your neighborhood. I do think that's contributing to some of the feelings that I'm hearing tonight about the disrespect and the discourse. And now I'll shut up.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, can I chime in? Bill Leo Grand over on Chestnut Street. I want to thank Mark for his presentation on the idea of a safety committee. I mean, after all, although obviously the village can't provide, as Steve was saying, all of the anti-crime measures that we need, all of the policing that we need, I think it does make sense for us to have a safety committee to, first of all, look at what can and can't be done within the authority of the village. Think about ways that we might interface more effectively with surrounding jurisdictions and with the county or even with the state, for that matter, and without any kind of legislative authority, if you will, as Mark was putting it, as really just advisory to the council. It seems to me that there are enough issues that have come up in the last couple of months that makes that good sense. With regard to the ethics resolution, I've made my point of view known on that. I won't repeat it. I think there are better ways to handle a problem if there is actually a problem. And with regard to the elections, it seems to me that the election by mail worked really well this past year. And given the uncertainty of where we're going to be with the pandemic, we ought to plan, it seems to me, to be voting again by mail this time around. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Jackie, are you there? Let's see. She had asked me earlier about calling in, so I want to see if she's there. I thought I saw her number. Hang on one second. I think I don't see it now, so we'll come back if it comes back on. My apologies.
Susan, it's Tiffany. If you guys don't have somebody else waiting, I don't think anyone else is waiting, so go for it.
Thanks. This is Tiffany Sisman, Bradley Lane. I just wanted to echo a lot of the comments that Steve Trower made more succinctly than I would have. And I did submit, one of the things I encouraged folks to do is just directly email and call our council members, because I found that to be some of the most informative discussions that I've had with them, learning about what they're balancing between the other village priorities, whether it's, operational or budgetary, and then how they are actually engaging with some of the other, local municipalities. And I know I'm more aware of this, having been a council member for years, but also, even in the last 6 months, I've had the fortune of talking to folks on the council who educated me on additional things that they're doing now. So I just wanted to encourage folks, not only do we have these times at the meetings, but they're accessible via phone or email. And I found that to be where I've learned the most and had the most fruitful conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments?
Yes, I wanted to make a short comment. I'm sorry, I know I'm in the dark. This is Nina Stark-Slapnick from Chestnut Street. I just wanted to say that I think that it only makes sense to have mail-in voting. It's just obvious, all the reasons. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I think that the proposals for ethics feel really rushed to me, and I think it's creating a box and creating rules where there may or may not need to be rules, and I think it really should be thought out more clearly before action is taken. And then I support the safety that they're talking about.
Okay,
that's all I had to say.
thank you, Nina. Anyone else? Okay, if not, then I would very quickly like to address the comment about minutes. And I would direct anyone's attention who isn't familiar with the requirements for our minutes to the Open Meetings Act manual for Maryland, which specifies that minutes must reflect 3 types of information: each item that the public body considers, the action the public body took on the item, and each vote that was recorded. It actually says that discussions are not supposed to be included. So if anything, we are including more information than in our minutes than not only is required, but I suppose recommended. As far as appending things to the minutes that residents have provided, we have discussed this and agreed that minutes should really just reflect what transpired. As far as the agenda items, those 2 are supposed to be council directed, council generated packets. So we shouldn't actually include resident comments, but you should all know that everything you submit to the council, by virtue of it going to a council member or the entire council, is a public record. So that if anyone ever wants to file a Public Information Act request for a specific record or for a group of resident comments on an issue, those would be public records. I think there's some confusion about that, thinking that perhaps it's not in the record if it's not attached to the minutes or to the agenda, but that is a misinterpretation for whatever reason. Okay, so.
Susan, I'd like to just, excuse me, Susan, I'd just like to comment real quick. Thanks.
Quickly, please.
My quick comment on that is I appreciate the explanation, but I just want to, for the record, I had submitted suggested edits to the minutes that I felt were substantive and critical for the safety and public health of our village. And so unfortunately they were not included, but what I did was I shared them separately with Niles earlier. And knowing that this is an administrative action, I hope to follow up, because I appreciate the fact that if you folks have a certain way that you want to approve and accept minutes, but if I feel as a council member there are things that are substantive and critical for the safety and well-being, I will just work with Niles and the council, other members, of how they could be included, perhaps as an attachment or somewhere. But I really, it's very important to me that comments I make and edits to minutes that I feel are important for public safety and the welfare of our residents are included in some way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Understood. And I will just follow up with one quick thing, and then we really need to move on because this is really going on. I actually went back and listened to the transcript and discovered that it was not literally correct. It was not verbatim, and in fact shouldn't be verbatim because we don't really need to provide transcripts. But I wasn't able to find your comments that you had appended as you stated them. And so we need our records, our minutes, to be an accurate record of what transpires at a meeting. And we also have been striving to get them to the length or the level of detail that you would find in other jurisdictions. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at, say, the Chevy Chase Village minutes. I know a lot of people like to cite Chevy Chase Village as our model. They have about a 3-page minute summary, and they do not have resident comments attached. Their packets similarly, and also just for the record on packets, we don't have to provide packets even. So when people are suggesting that we are not complying with what is required, that too is incorrect. So we just need to, and just to make one further point about minutes, a lot of residents really take exception to the length of our minutes. They say, you know, minutes are supposed to be, as I recall, Lauren Beal once saying in the election committee meetings, they're supposed to be minutes, not seconds or hours. At any rate, they're not, they're supposed to be summaries. So there we go. Okay.
Susan, thanks. I just want to respond really quick, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I will continue to provide additional comments if needed, and I'll defer to the council if they continue or would accept those, and we'll keep it at that. And then during a meeting, if I feel a particular point happens to be essential or critical for the safety and welfare of our residents, I'll just kindly point out to Niles that, you know, this is a particular point I'd like to reflect in the minutes. Thank you.
Is there a particular reason the minutes are more powerful than the actual transcripts of the recording? These things are all recorded. Like, is it just for the by virtue of having a clip notes, like a summary, or is it something that actually? I mean,
well, Steve, I have to take. While I appreciate your comment, I must suggest that resident comment time is over. But they should not be more important than the transcript. And in fact, that's why some jurisdictions, if you provide a complete audio, do not even require posting of minutes after. And some, I mean, that's just the Maryland Open Meetings Act manual. And that's why some jurisdictions only do one or the other. But I think we've exhausted that topic. More than a minute. Okay, so Keith, if you are still with us,
I'm gonna.
Do you have Community Engagement Committee?
You're going to need to unmute him, Niles.
Yeah,
Niles,
yep.
I asked you to mute him because he. Yeah.
Let me. There we go. He's here.
Okay, I'm on now.
Okay.
All right, Susan. Real quick here. Keith Allen, chairman of the Engagement Committee. We went over a few points here in our last meeting, And I'm going to enumerate those for you now. A meeting was held Tuesday, December 22nd. It was a very positive, engaging meeting and welcome discussion before the holidays. The group started off with what they are thankful for, losses that we have experienced, and even had Santa join us. There was a thoughtful discussion about ideas on how we can improve a welcome basket and other suggestions from residents, as well as the Village Council annual survey. There was recognition of the Boy Scouts who helped shovel a walkway of a village resident during the snowstorm. That was a good model, perhaps, to pursue in the future. Also explored other options for 2021 using funds that might be available if snow is above a certain amount. Sally and Renee have great ideas for a community newsletter, including to put out a call for submissions for residents to introduce and welcome new residents and their families to the community. A history corner featuring background on some of the historic properties in our neighborhood, and or spotlight prominent historic residents or events, and a feature of a piece of artwork from the youngest members of the community. And the current policy of the council newsletter limits content that's 250 words and no pictures, and it needs a council approval to modify, and that it may be better to have a separate blog or resident managed to link with the VMA newsletter. And then finally, the council liaison appointment to the engagement committee is pending. And those are the points that we covered in our last committee meeting.
Thanks very much, Dave.
And thank you, Susan.
Okay, take care. Okay, so now we have the resident listening session report out from Jeff Blander.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you, everyone. I'll make this short in a few minutes, but first and foremost, really appreciate other members of the council supporting this idea. There's been a lot of positivity around having these additional sessions to really discuss a bit more substantively, but beyond the few minutes that are at the beginning of the council meetings, to really go in depth around specific areas. And I'll just highlight a few because I know many of those actually will cascade as part of the upcoming agenda that we'll go through. We talked again several times, but worth saying once more, we opened up with Frank Carell, who was a very dear friend of mine, and I know how much he cared about this village. While he was going through dialysis and he knew his days were numbered, he would take the time to talk about the importance of our community and how we can improve both the tone and the way that we can engage each other. And I miss Frank, and I love him dearly. A couple of the other pieces, I'll say it in very short order. With the tree ordinance, again, I want to commend everyone who's been involved. We had some good substantive discussion, and I think that will be reflected on the agenda item coming up. In terms of the ethics, again, this has been well discussed, but there's a number of things that came up, inclusive of really wanting to discuss the research that Ron had come up with around the idea of possibly some hybrid approaches and the idea of having an additional forum to perhaps go through some of those. The voting came up and again has already been reflected, but the importance of having an all mail-in vote for at least this year was considered in those discussions critical. And Mark, I want to also just thank you and your time. You had also given a presentation of the safety committee, which is also later on its agenda, and you had gone through that very thoughtfully and carefully. And again, for those who at least attended and expressed their opinions, it seemed like a very positive discussion and nonsensical. And we will obviously get to that a bit later on the agenda for more discussion and potential vote. So with that said, I will turn it over. And if anyone else on the council would like to comment, but again, I just want to thank everyone. These sessions have been, I think, very informative. Folks have been very positive, and I think we look forward, and hopefully they'll continue to have more substantive discussion outside of the lanes of the council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Doug Lohmeyer, are you on the call?
He just sorry.
Is that a yes? Are you muted?
He's there. Yep. Go ahead, Doug.
Doug, would you please give us your building administrator's report?
Doug, do you hear me? Oh, let's see. Doug.
We can hear you. Start talking.
We we might be having a technical difficulty.
So well, that's actually the most logical place, because otherwise he's got a probably long
Let me
stretch.
see if I can get him. Hang on one second.
On the phone, and just
I'm just gonna try to do this this way.
Hey, Susan, while we're waiting, who's the teenager in the suit that's on here?
Oh, yeah, talking about Ron.
That's Ron Gold. Oh.
I'm calling Doug right now.
Hello.
Hey, Doug.
Yes.
So we couldn't hear you on there, so if you could do it from here.
Okay.
So just go ahead and give your report. Everybody can hear, right?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Just a couple things to go over. At 6609 Brookville Road, the applicants have submitted an application to remove the existing porch and add an addition to the existing house. The building permit was issued on December 7th. The work has begun. On 7200 Chestnut, the applicants applied for a building permit to construct an addition to the west side of the existing house. That building permit was issued on October 9th, and construction has begun on that project. At 7200 Delfield, the property owners applied for a demolition and building permit to remove the existing house and to build a new house. The village demolition permit was issued on December 14th, and the building permit was issued on January 4th. The old house has been removed, and they're beginning to start construction on the new house. At 3517 Shepherd Street, the applicant has submitted an application to add an addition to the right side of the existing house. That building permit was issued on November 24th, and the work has begun. And the State Highway Administration was out making some improvements to Brookville Road last week. They repaved the intersection at Cummings and Shepherd, and there's I believe scheduled to do more work, and I am contacting the state to get an update on that. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Despite all the technical difficulties.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you.
Well.
All set?
Yep.
Okay, so next, I think we begin our discussion of the election plan and policy and possible adoption thereof, as well as in the course of that discussion, of course, we will determine whether or not we will be conducting an all mail-in election. That's why our election committee drafted these documents. So who would like to begin the discussion? Do any council members wish to
Yeah, I have one
Ian?
question on the draft, and just the simple one. The says, and this is carried over from last year, each candidate may designate one person as an official observer. Well, last year at the mail-in, it was by Zoom, and is there any reason not to have anyone in the village watch what's going on? But the reason in the past was that, remember, people counted in that one little room, and you just couldn't have everybody piling in. With a Zoom call-in approach, there's one camera set up, everyone could be muted, there's no opportunity for disruption or anything. Is there any reason for objecting to that?
I would defer to Ron on that, but I thought that was a stipulation of state law. Is that right,
That
Ron?
at least one person could be, but is there any reason why anyone, any village resident could not be involved?
Yeah, it's certainly an option. So the state law with respect to watchers does not apply to the village, but can be adopted as a best practice. But if the count is being done remotely by Zoom, I don't see any reason why anyone wouldn't be able to log in as long as they're not disruptive, and the moderator can keep them on mute, keep them in the waiting room until identity is verified.
That sounds good. More viewing options later this spring for everybody who's looking for entertainment.
Yeah. And there was one other, a very minor, if I can find it in here, a typo. Where was that? There was I think an it for an is or an is for an it. I will let you know when I find it again.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, that's all.
Hi, Susan, it's Jeff. And I'm sorry, Ron, were you about to say a comment, please? No? Okay.
No, I'm looking for the it as well.
It was at the top of the page, but I thought I had marked it.
So,
here it is. Yeah, well, hold on. Appendix A, second paragraph. If the committee deems it appropriate, right now it says deems is appropriate. So a single letter, that's it.
Got it.
Okay.
Hi, folks. I'll cut to the chase, but just a moment of lightness. I just want to say, and I'm noticing this now, that I do not have a goatee. Apparently, my daughter, she uses my Zoom account and puts filters on. So I guess, she usually uses the unicorn. So I guess I consider myself lucky because I have no idea how to turn this thing off. So I appreciate the comment. Listen. I'll make this short, and I know that my fellow council members respect me in terms of my background in public health. And so I also want to say very clearly to Tiffany, I know at the time Josh was also still on the committee when this was being formulated, and others, and the hard work that goes into this, truly. But we have to also look at the time frame. When this was developed, it was developed in September and October. The rate of COVID deaths and victims at the time was around 200,000. Fast forward to where we are now, we're at over 400,000 deaths. We've just had a transition in administrations where we expect to have at least a 90-day period of needing to wear masks at all federal buildings. And we also have had from public health officials at all levels, unbridled community spread. Also, what we've heard quite definitively is that there are no assurances at this point in time that we will have a rollout of vaccines that would provide community coverage. I was also on a call with Montgomery County officials earlier today, and there's a lot of concern there, and they're not even sure if they'll be able to open up the school. So I'm going to sort of just get to the point, which is the thing that concerns me most about the election policy. And again, I say it with respect. I know at the time when people developed it, it seemed like a reasonable plan was, we're going to make the all mail-in as the fallback option. That, if things change, then perhaps what we'll do is we'll make it our plan B. And we even heard on the last discussion we had with the council at the last meeting, there was even a throwing out, well, we could actually probably pull this together if we made a decision a month before. And so here's the bottom line. Things have changed so materially since September that we really can't approve a policy that makes all mail-in as the second option or fallback. Oh, hold it, honey. Oh, this is Rosie. She can say hi, but honey.
I can
One second. Honey,
I'm
one
just
second.
saying
Oh.
I can turn the mustache
Okay, I'll
thing
tell you
off.
what. Oh, you know how to turn the mustache thing off. I'm sorry, folks.
Can I see the mustache?
Yeah, hold it. So let me just end my comment there with, it's really critical for us to make a decision on the all mail-in ballot, and then we can discuss the policies of how to support that, because right now the current policy makes all mail-in as Plan B, and that concerns me a great deal. So I just want to thank you all for listening, and I yield and pass back over. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So I'll weigh in. I agree. And Rosie, you do a great job. I want a mustache though, so you have to be able to convey that over here. I think, it made sense last fall to be thinking about this Plan A and Plan B, and I think all of us have said, 6 months will be fine, and another 6 months will be fine. I agree. So my recommendation would be that we make we make a motion if after hearing from my fellow council members, that we just decide right now we will go to all mail-in for this election, and we can make decisions about if we want to modify that later. But for this upcoming election, my recommendation would be that we go to all mail-in.
Todd, I would just like to agree with that position. And I would also note that at last month's meeting, the election committee recommended that we adopt an all mail-in vote, recognizing even then, so clearly they're a very prescient committee, that we would be needing to do this. And so I think it has been the expectation, although, as you said, they were preparing for contingencies. So I also would support it.
Do we have to make a motion on that, or
We do, if anyone, if we're all ready to vote.
I'll make a motion that this upcoming election be all mail-in.
Second?
Second.
Support.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, opposed? No. Everyone, it carries unanimously.
Is this our first unanimous?
I think it may well be.
Let's not
Okay.
set precedents here.
No, I think it was when we took the sign ordinance down. That was also unanimous. So
No, to table it, right, to table it, yeah. Well, okay, so we will need to adopt the policy that would effectuate this, right?
Well,
Ron, is
Yeah,
that right?
so
what do we need?
we'll prepare for the February meeting an emergency declaration, a resolution to declare the state of emergency continuing in Martin's Additions, and therefore, authorizing the universal by mail vote according to the charter amendments that were effectuated last year.
Okay, quick question, Ron. If we were to do this on a permanent basis, right now we're operating under an emergency resolution. What would we have to do this on a permanent basis?
I'll need to look at the charter provisions to see if anything would need to be amended to make it permanent. And generally speaking, as things stands now, you're able to decide on a year-by-year basis whether an emergency exists that justifies adopting processes that are necessary for preservation of the public health, safety.
But if the emergency goes away, then we can still continue to want to do this. We may have to do a permanent charter amendment.
Maybe not. I just don't recall if that flexibility was built in. I need to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
If I may speak to that for a moment, as the chair, I just want to say that yes, that it is possible to revise the ordinance to provide for all mail voting in the future. I've actually drafted that and have it ready to go anytime the council would like to look at it. It's ready to go. I just haven't sent it into you yet. But I will be happy to provide that because I developed it in June after we did the mail voting this year. So that package is ready to go anytime you want to look at it. Glad to help.
Thank you.
But meanwhile, while waiting for this to become officially legal for Ron's introduction in February, I'd like to make sure that the election committee proceeds on the basis of assuming whatever they need to start putting into place for mail-in. So.
Thanks, Todd. On that note, it's Tiffany. I have actually a question. So I know you guys introduced at the last meeting what had been prepared, and it had if you still find these things to be in place at the beginning of the election process, then you will instruct us on how to act. So I've heard you guys instruct us that we're going to do an all mail-in, so that's great. I'm wondering if your vote was on the policy and plan as drafted, since we had included dates and times in the plan. So I don't know if that's a Ron question or a Susan or a Todd. So I
just looked at the charter amendment, and I'm reminded that Tiffany Cisna suggested language to put in the charter to give you that flexibility going forward. So you don't have to amend the charter again. It's already in there.
That's okay.
The charter currently authorizes the council to decide on a year-by-year basis whether a mail-in only election is going to be.
So that the charter amendment that we made last year was done on an emergency basis, but the the statement goes on forever.
Correct.
So, okay,
correct.
that was a little bit of confusion. Okay, so we did introduce it as an emergency, but it is good forever.
And I'm also fine with the dates and stuff that were in the policy as submitted by the election committee.
Yeah, so you still need a state of emergency in order to adopt emergency procedures. But given that you have plenty of time this year, you don't have to adopt emergency procedures. You can just lay out a mail-in.
But Ron, why are they emergency procedures if the council introduced this in December and they've had layover to this month?
Yeah, I'm saying this is not an emergency.
Thank you. Sorry, I misheard.
I was trying to fully answer Arthur's question as to what do we need to do in the future. And the charter provides that if you're going to do something that isn't timely adopted in your annual election rules and you're making a decision on an emergency basis, then you have to adopt an emergency resolution based on a declaration of emergency by the state. But in an ordinary year where there's no declaration of emergency by the state, you still can have a mail-in only election. You just have to lay out the procedures and have them adopted by the council in advance.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on.
And that's what they adopted tonight, correct?
Well, I need to look through it and make sure there's nothing we need to change.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we could come back to this, and if there's no amendment to the text needed, then the election plan could be adopted tonight with that amendment. Maybe we just need to strike the sentence that says, if we're still under a state of emergency. Maybe that might be the only thing we need to change, but let me look at it.
Okay, shall we move on then? And come back to this? You're suggesting? Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Okay, so next we'd like to discuss have a discussion and possible introduction of ordinance 2021-1-1, ordinance to expand the jurisdiction of the ethics committee to include oaths of service and to add complaint resolution procedures.
Thanks. I'll just take the lead on this, and if I may, and not everybody on this call has been involved in the process since last summer. So for those of you who have, please bear with me for any redundancies. So the origin of this relates to what started was complaints that we received when I was on the council last year. 2 complaints that were received, and we received the complaints. We notified those who were on the receiving, those who were, I can't remember whether the complainants or what we call them, but the people against whom the complaints were made. But that was really all that we as a council could do, other than, shrug our shoulders empathetically, or say, or just assume that those involved as the recipients of the complaints were in the wrong or not. We had no way of looking at that. There was nothing that helped us investigate that anymore. So all we could do was really at that point shrug our shoulders rather than just saying to the person receiving it, well, goodbye, or, other than that. So it was uncomfortable for everybody involved. And it was at that point that we looked at what was out there. And if you look at the code right now, there was a pretty good process for investigating conflicts of interest. So it made sense, number one, to say, hey, there's already stuff in the charter, in the code, processes in place for these things. And it made sense to look at the body that was already addressing conflicts of interest and say, let's add that to the plate, where there are complaints for violations of the oath of office. So the process started in August, where we asked the ethics committee to look at this. And they held 5 meetings that were open to the public. We had residents that participated in person, well, video-wise and in person at these meetings. The committee also received a number of written suggestions for modifying that. And over the course of those 5 months, I have to say the ethics committee did a great job. They read through everything that they received in writing from residents pertaining to the ethics, the work that they were doing. They addressed everything. That didn't mean they agreed with every single thing, but they gave a fair hearing and fair discussion of the topics. And in December, they compiled the results and then forward that recommendation over to the council. After that was forwarded over to the council, we held a public forum, the forum that Jeff mentioned, and we discussed this for, I don't know, maybe about half an hour or so, give or take, either side of that, and received even more resident comments about this. So I guess there's kind of 3 things I'd like to cover, if I may. And the first one's kind of just like a pause for a second. And I'd like to hear from my fellow council members. First and foremost, are we all in agreement that we need a process? I'm not talking about where the process occurs at this point. That I'm going to come to next. But that we need a process for helping us address complaints. And I'd love to, a yes or a no, or you can add qualifications. But Arthur, you raise your hand?
Yeah. First, I'd like to go back to an earlier statement of yours that at the time that the complaints came in, the council was unaware that we did have the right to deal with it, just as we have the right to hire and fire employees, at-will employees. The council has the right to appoint and disappoint committee members. And so we could have dealt with it in that way, or dealt with it in a different way to ask for changes in behavior or recusal and so on. But we weren't aware of that at the time. It was only afterwards, I think, that we became aware.
You're right, Arthur, but we also had no way of trying to digging into it, for trying to figure out what was there and what was.
Right, we had no procedures. Well, let me, that's correct. Now let me go on and go through the oath of office that we take. In fact, there are, depending on how you count, 4 or 8 things that people say they're going to do it. I'll read it to you.
But so Arthur, so I just want to can I just stick to this process, right? We're going to come to that unless this is related to.
Well, because it is related.
Okay.
When you take the oath of office, you say that you will support the Constitution of the U.S. That's number one. Support the Constitution of the state of Maryland, number two. To the best of my skill and judgment, 3 and 4. Faithfully, diligently, and faithfully, 5 and 6. Without partiality or prejudice, execute the office. Well, the proposed ordinance only deals with 2 out of those 8 issues, the partiality or prejudice. And it establishes procedures very clearly for doing that. Evidence, procedures, due process. For the other 6 issues, we're back to where we were before. The council would have to deal with that on its own without any procedures, any due process, and deal with it the way we deal with hiring and firing employees. And so I'm wondering, I have to tell you, before going through this carefully today, I was 60-40 against the ordinance. Today, I'm kind of 40-60 for it, because I think that most cases don't even fall under the ordinance. Suppose somebody doesn't come to meetings and they're not acting diligently. And a committee member says, we're doing all this hard work and so doesn't even come to the meetings. Can you do something about it? Well, we would have to meet and decide what we were going to do about it outside of the ordinance. Or if one of the committee members was down at the Capitol last week and went into the Capitol, would they be upholding the Constitution of the United States? That doesn't fall under the ordinance either, and we would have to deal with it as such. So my problem, it's not so much a problem, my problem is that the ordinance deals with 2 out of the 8 conditions that the oath requires of council members or committee members. And seeing that probably most cases, most complaints wouldn't even fall into this bailiwick, into this bucket, I say, let's go ahead and pass it. But we would still have the other problems, the problems that you're saying, of lack of procedures, lack of due process for the 6 out of the other 8 conditions that people take the oath for. That's what I mean. Mark.
I don't want to get in the middle of this except to give a little background. The reason why the Ethics Committee focused on the last 2 issues was we viewed them as the only issues of ethics in the existing code. The other ones we thought had to do with management and were not ethics issues. So at our very first meeting, was really the second meeting, but the first meeting when we reviewed the possibilities, we purposely skinnied down the issue to the issues that we considered to be the ethics issues. The others we did not think were ethics issues. So that's the background.
Oh, good. Okay, that kind of supports what I thought. So we do not have a process, procedures, rules of evidence, or anything for 6 of the 8 commitments that you take under the oath. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, thank you, Arthur. Other council members?
Well, if I could just sort of piggyback in a way on Arthur's comments, maybe the reason we don't have a measure for addressing those is because we haven't experienced them. As Ron said, the law reacts, and we have experienced very serious breaches of or purported or alleged, but certainly sufficiently serious that I think 4 of the current council members saw at least a need to figure out a way to go forward in adjudicating these breaches. So I would certainly be on board.
I'm not asking for a vote on the ordinance.
I understand, but I'm with you on the first part. But I just wanted to address the fact that, we hadn't didn't have a procedure for all of them.
Thank you. And Katya, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Katya. Go ahead.
I would like to also say that I support establishing a procedure for addressing impartiality concerns. I think it would benefit the operations of the village, and yes, so I do support moving forward with that.
Thanks, Katya. Jeff?
Hi, Todd, and I think you know, and other members of the council know, there's no really yes/no for me, but I'll make it very quick. You know, I do really appreciate the effort that's gone into this, and I think the process itself, quite frankly, has been very eye-opening in a good way in terms of understanding how we can continue to improve our ordinance process. In terms of complaint procedures, you know, obviously there were submissions before I joined the council, and there are some that I've been privy to since. And clearly having an SOP or some way of dealing with it makes sense. I don't think there's anyone that would say, you know, you shouldn't have anything that deals with how you deal with complaints, even if it were like a Dropbox. But with that said, I'm just going to close out. And again, I want to recognize Mark Efron, and I say it in a positive light, is as part of that community forum that we just had, listening forum, you know, part of it was, could we just have a public forum to talk about this? And again, I'm not putting him on the spot. It's more of the idea of, I think there are some good options that Ron Bolt put on the table for us to consider, you know, things like, should it be focused on public trust? Or maybe it's exceptions, you know, is it when we don't have a quorum or if there's a conflict of interest? So all I'm saying is I think there's a lot of things that came out because of the really hard work of Debbie and Ron and Lori and Mark and the community and others, and yourself included, that, you know, I think there's material there for us to continue to review in good public forum and get to some process. So I'll close there and turn it back over. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jeff. You were stealing my thunder for the other two parts that I was going to get to. So
Not intentional, and I apologize.
No. I say that with a smile. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that we're all in agreement that we need some kind of process. We have to still figure out where that occurs, but we need some way of addressing these things. So now I'd like to
wait. Hold on. I'm not sure. You know, I could be. Let me go back. I'll probably read the minutes and say, no, I didn't say what I said, but when I hear what I said, I didn't say what I thought I said. But given that point, we do not have process, and we don't seem to be concerned that we don't have process. Suppose somebody on the election committee picked up absentee ballots at the post office and stuffed them in the trash can. We don't have a process for dealing with that. It has nothing to do with partiality. They're just not acting diligently. And we would have to meet in closed session, as we do when we deal with employees' decisions, and decide what we're going to do about that. And I'm wondering what makes partiality different from that. If we don't need process and evidence and due process for the 6 out of 8 other kinds of issues that could come up, why do we need it for 2 of them? So that's my question. And I'm not sure. Well, I will go on to say, do we need it? We hire and fire people where money is involved, income is involved, without going through a due process, established set of procedures. When we are dealing with unpaid volunteers, do we need this kind of superstructure to deal with it? The way I look at it, it's a very big superstructure on a very small craft.
That we've all voiced our thoughts on whether we need it, right? So maybe we should.
Do we need it? Do we need it for these 2 out of the 8 and not for I said we don't need it for the 8 out of 8. We could deal with it in the kind of closed sessions we deal with. On the other hand, I suspect that out of the 2 out of 8 violations, 2 out of the 8 conditions, we're not going to get that many of them, so I'd be willing to support it. But in But as a matter of principle, I don't think we need it.
Okay. It may be helpful to point out that currently the constitutional oath that is taken by the council members is not the same oath that is taken by committee members. Currently, the oath for committee members is faithfully execute my duties with strict impartiality and according to the best of my ability.
Okay, so the oath that's specified in the Constitution is not the same.
Right, yeah. That's the oath. The constitutional oath is taken by council members. But we wrote somewhat of a condensed oath with respect to the oath policy adopted in 2019. And so, the ordinance could include all of those same statements, but I think the ethics committee said, if it's an ethics issue, it's properly before us. If it's not an ethics issue, if it's a crime, destruction of ballots, then it doesn't need to be run through the ethics committee, if that helps.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So what I'd like to do next is there have been discussions, forum and otherwise, about areas of research. There were two areas that I'd love to flesh out a little bit more. One is, Ron, if you could, you did some, you reported on some work that you had done previously about what other villages had in place, why they didn't have ethics rules or not, in their code. Obviously, there's the state, the county, there are the big boys in our neighborhood, and then there are those that are similar in size to us. And I'm wondering if for everybody here, so most of these guys are your clients. Why do they not have anything that we're talking about? That's really what I'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's my conclusion doing some research is that most ethics codes are borrowed from somewhere else, and they can be traced back to very early days. And it's not until a special issue comes up that the old model may be amended. The law is reactive, and if an issue comes up, then the old way of doing things is modified. So of the jurisdictions I looked at, most only impose conflicts of interest with respect to financial concerns and don't address impartiality. However, it could just be because those types of issues haven't arisen in those jurisdictions. Some communities do have special provisions with respect to election committee members, saying that they can't run for office, for example, and the town of Somerset says they must remain neutral and provides a process for addressing an election committee member who's alleged to not have been neutral. And that would be something that probably arose from a specific incident. And so the fact that we don't see the regulations in other jurisdictions doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad idea. It might just mean that the issue hasn't arose yet.
Okay. So we do, what you don't know, or what you do know, is that there haven't ever been discussions in any of these other communities on this topic where the community has said, no, we're not going to do anything related to this.
That's right. So, I've been practicing in the area for 14, 15 years, representing 10 clients now. It wasn't always 10. Started out with maybe 6 or so, but the issue hasn't come up elsewhere, to my knowledge. I don't represent every municipality to the same extent. Some use me sparingly, but to my recollection, the issue of impartiality hasn't come up in other towns.
Okay. All right, thanks. So that's helpful to on the one hand, it's too bad that we're looking at this because we have reasons to look at it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't shy away from moving forward just because of what our other communities are or are not doing. I think the other area of research I'd like you to talk about is where you laid out different options, Ron. We sent those over to us. We then published those for the community at large to look at. There were 4 or 5 ways that we could be going about looking at this. And I think what would be helpful for everybody on this call and for the residents at large is for you to kind of maybe just go through some bullets or pros and cons of each idea there, and from your legal perspective, which ones provide us with the kind of things we ought to be looking at. So if you don't mind, would you take it? Maybe just remind everybody on this call who doesn't have all the options in front of them. Could you describe each one for a sec, and then as you go through each one and describe it, and then talk about pros and cons of each?
Sure, happy to do so. And I'm glad you used the phrase from a legal perspective, because I'll tell you, I can give you legal advice, but then the council must decide what is politically appropriate. The options that I came up with, were based on considerations that there are some policy concerns for the council to address. And there were 5 options. There might be more, but the 5 that seem the most appropriate are: first, to amend the code as recommended by the Ethics Committee, to not necessarily add new rules or regulations, which it doesn't do, but add a process for resolving a complaint. So, since the policy was adopted in 2019 to have these oaths executed by committee members, committee members have promised to exercise their duties faithfully with impartiality. So that that's already a requirement in the village. And what the ordinance would do would add a process for resolving a complaint. And the pros there are, currently there's not a process, and so the council would just use its inherent powers to resolve a complaint. Maybe that resolution isn't done uniformly. A benefit of having a written procedure is that it will presumably be exercised uniformly and fairly, and folks know in advance, this is the process I can expect in the unlikely event that a complaint is raised. The downside, I don't really see a legal downside, but there are political downsides that have been asserted by the community members. Next, I suggested limiting the scope of the definition official, who can be the subject of a complaint that would be sent to the Ethics Committee for review. And so, as we discussed at the last meeting, and as Arthur pointed out, the Maryland constitutional oath applies to offices of public trust, which a lot of towns currently only apply to elected officials. But based on my research and reading the text of the oath closely, I think an office of public trust probably includes the election committee members. Some other communities have reached that conclusion, and that's why they make their election committee members take the same constitutional oath that council members must take. So it may be that we were actually doing that wrong for years, and they should be taking the same robust constitutional oath that council members take. So a pro of that approach is we may be conforming to what's already required in the law, and to the extent there's heartburn in imposing that complaint process on other committee members that may not be sitting in offices of public trust per se, then the benefit is we're narrowing the scope of applicability. A con to that approach, really don't see much of a legal con there, other than you may just want to treat all committee members the same way so that you don't have different processes and procedures for different committees. Because right now, as of 2019, everybody's taken the same oath. Next, we talked about limiting sanctions because that was a concern raised by some in the community, but I think as the Ethics Committee pointed out, their recommendation already included eliminating existing language that referred to prosecution of civil citations. So that language is stricken. So there again, the pro is limiting the apparent impact and eliminating the monetary sanction. Really don't see a legal con there. I'd have to stretch and maybe come up with an argument. It's probably none, but maybe you could say, well, if there's no sanction in the code, then people don't take their oath as seriously. But yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned with that. Next, we talked about adopting only a modest code amendment that would say, for example, the Ethics Committee hears complaints related to council members and may also hear such other complaints as directed by the council, and then adopt the actual procedure documents in companion regulations. So, sometimes governments do that. The legislature will adopt a code provision that says this is the law. Now, agency, you go figure out how to implement it and adopt your regulations for your processes. A pro to that might be, again, addressing community concern that the ordinance somehow becomes overbearing or having a chilling effect on volunteers. But I really don't see that as a legal pro. That's more of a policy consideration for the council. A con to that approach is whatever you put in a regulation versus code will be subject to challenge. Someone may say, well, if it's not in the code, I don't have to follow it. And this procedure that you've adopted exceeds the authority in the code, so it doesn't apply to me. Ordinarily, a general rule of thumb is we don't want to overburden the code with detailed language that is better served or better set forth in a policy, but I really don't think that applies here. The language that's drafted isn't really going to overburden the code. In fact, if you look at what language is there now and what language is proposed by the Ethics Committee, I think the new language is actually more concise and simpler. And again, if you're going through this process, my legal advice would be, why not do it in the way where we're going to be sure that what we've adopted is legally enforceable? And then, the last option was the simplest of all, and let's stay away from the code and let's just adopt a policy manual. And the same pros and cons apply there. If it's just a policy, then it's not going to be binding, and perhaps most importantly, it would not empower the Ethics Committee to hear these complaints, because right now the Ethics Committee's jurisdiction is limited to employees and council members. And part of the reason of going through this exercise was that because there have been prior complaints that have been or would have been difficult for the council to resolve because the complaints involved the council members in some manner. And so, it would be beneficial to have what we'd hope would be a completely neutral body to hear a complaint that somehow may involve a council member. Because I think it would be difficult for a council to review a complaint involving one of its members. It'd be better to have an independent body take a look at that. So, those were the options that I came up with. There might be more, but, those I think are the clearest.
Thanks, Ron. I appreciate that. So I'd just love to hear if any questions or comments from my fellow council members about what they heard about the pros and cons from Ron.
Well, of course, I am going to advocate for a legally enforceable code, codifying rather than simply putting in a manual or a policy, because I agree that if we go to the trouble of enacting ethics laws, we need to be able to enforce them, and we need to have some assurance that they're not going to be subjected to challenge on some grounds that we're overreaching. I think, the other alternatives simply don't offer enough confidence in the process. And I also think that having something more stringent, I suppose, on the books, and we should all remember that council members are subjected to these. So if we're enacting them, clearly we're bound by them too. But a more formal approach should enhance public confidence in our government officials. That's something that has been, as we're talking about changes that are recommended in society at large over the last couple of days, especially. That's one of the big arguments, is that we need to start enforcing and enacting ethics laws at the local level. Done.
Hey, Todd, I'll just jump in and I'll make it pretty quick. And again, I want to thank Ron for going through the list. And I think we all agree again that this really provides some really good food for thought. And my one comment is, this is a good discussion, but because it's happening at a council meeting and the way we're structured, our residents can't comment right now. And I really would like to just put on the table that this is a good discussion, but I think what we need to do is schedule a public forum so that this could be discussed in an interactive way. I don't think that we're ready to make an introduction tonight, but we certainly have food for thought on a lot of good options that Ron has presented, others have presented. And, I think it's just a logical step of let's get the community together, let's go through this together, and assuredly we'll come up with some process. Thank you.
And I would just note that the community has had abundant opportunities, both with the ethics committee's very thorough meetings, as well as several resident comment sessions, and I guess a couple of community forums. So we have had very in-depth discussions. Sorry?
I was saying thanks, Susan, but I think, again, this isn't to get into a debate. I appreciate you recognizing other places where there's been these discussions, but the committee meetings are also, there are limited time for when residents can comment. And I think we recognized last month that the committee was focused on the ordinance. It wasn't focused on these other options. So again, we can be respectful. We don't have to agree, but I really believe we need a public forum where the community can really engage with the council and Ron to really go through this additional information and work together on a solution. Because I think that we can come up with one that will certainly meet the standards that you're looking at, but at the same time, you know, have our members of the residents and community feel that they were involved in finalizing a process. I think we're probably close. We just need a little bit more time for that kind of discussion and interaction. Thanks. Over.
I don't have anything additional to add, just because I feel like a lot of the points have already been voiced repeatedly, and I don't want to waste anybody else's time anymore. I don't have any new information, but I do find the presentation very helpful. Thank you, Todd and Ron.
Arthur, do you have thoughts you want to add?
Well, I had a quick question for Ron. I cannot find that committee oath in the resolutions and the ordinances or anywhere. Where is that?
It's because it's in a policy and not in the code.
Arthur,
I'll email it to you right now,
where
Arthur.
it is too.
Yeah.
Arthur, it's if you go to the ethics page, Niles helped us update it, and the oath is actually one of the links on the ethics page.
Okay.
So go to the ethics page on the village website, and you'll be able to find it really easily.
Okay.
And I'll email it to you right now too, Arthur.
Okay. But I thought I had all that material here. But, so it is a policy.
That's correct. It's
Yes,
currently
it was a policy that was adopted in 2015. I'm looking for the exact date.
19.
But it was a 2015 policy adopted by the council.
And somehow when I downloaded all the policies, it wasn't there. Restricting parking, speed limit signs, and a whole bunch of other things. Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. So I guess let me weigh in on this, and that's what we've heard from Ron just now. Really, kind of ways of pros and cons on each of these things, on each of these options, and some of these options that Ron has mentioned have been discussed now for the past 2 or 3 months. You know, primarily, you know, let's do a policy or some kind of hybrid version of a policy or the like. And I guess, you know, I've been pretty clear about my thoughts on this. I voiced it to some extent at the forum, but I feel very strongly in our oath and what we're signed up to do. I feel very strongly, you know, particularly after seeing the events of the past 2 to 3 weeks, that what we agree to do in becoming, you know, acting on behalf of the village is important, and it needs to be taken seriously. I take it to heart, and it means a lot to me to know that, number one, the oath of office is taken seriously, and number two is if I'm in violation of that oath of office, that I want it to appear in the code, not in some policy manual somewhere as to how we address that. I'd like to have it be upfront and clear. That's my sense of things. And to me, it reflects the seriousness of what I've taken on. To me, it means that we take, you know, anybody who's addressing a complaint as seriously as somebody against whom a complaint is being received. And we codify that in a way that everybody can see and address. That's where I am on that. And what I've heard from Ron doesn't convince me that that a manual is the place to do this, nor am I convinced that we need more discussion on how we go at this in some kind of a policy manual. I just haven't heard enough to make me feel, from those options, to make me feel that we need to address this as a community further, or to get input. That's what we are here on the council for. is to do.
So should we bring this up for a vote, Todd?
Yes, so that you're just headed my way. So I would like to make a motion to introduce ordinance 2021-1-1, ordinance to expand the jurisdiction of the Ethics Committee to include oaths of office and to add complaint resolution procedures.
Second? Do we have a second?
I will second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Be in favor of introducing. I'm not sure I'll be in favor of the final vote. But we'll take that in the future.
And my vote is no. Thank you.
Okay, so that's a 4-1 vote with Jeff Blander voting against.
This is
Okay,
just introduction.
Okay, so then a public hearing would need to be scheduled.
right.
And there aren't 30 days between the January and February meetings. So you could have the hearing at the March meeting. Or,
Have a hearing in the interim, right?
yeah.
And then further.
Yeah, probably, well,
Ron, when we
prior practice would be to put it on the agenda for the March meeting for hearing and possible adoption.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on that. I think, again, the other council members can vote with their conscience, but I think we've heard loud and clear that having the public forum as an agenda item on the same day of adoption is something that folks would like to see change. So I think if we can have a standalone discussion and then separated from the adoption, I think that is something that the majority of our community would greatly appreciate. Thank you.
say, Ron, I need a little bit of clarity. When we talk about a public hearing, what does that mean?
So that means the public has the opportunity to comment on that specific agenda item. So ordinarily your agendas have a resident comment period, but then if there are any public hearings on the agenda, then resident comments are taken on that specific agenda item when that agenda item is called. And the council, hear the comments and decide whether, as a result of the comments, the ordinance should be amended, adopted, tabled, withdrawn, what have you. So the Martin's Additions Charter provides that no ordinance can be adopted until at least 30 days after it's been introduced. And the reason we have that 30-day window is because we want to allow for public comment. That's the minimum. We've talked about you're welcome to do whatever additional outreach that you think is appropriate, but that's the minimum required by the charter. So folks are able to submit comments in the interim and attend the next meeting or the meeting at which the agenda item is scheduled and submit comments. I call it a hearing to simplify the matter.
In the event that we don't have time or appetite for yet another forum, since this has already been discussed 11 times, Niles, maybe you can let me know or anyone else about our March agenda. We'll have budget discussions, I believe, at that time.
Right.
But could we not I anticipate a fairly light meeting. We could have a longer session, a longer forum at that meeting.
Right. So yes, I mean, I think the only thing, the for sure thing that we will need to do in March, right, is the introduction of the budget, because the same issue comes up in terms of having 30 days to approve the budget, and by state law, we have to have the budget submitted by the end of May. So there's a state mandated end date for that. But outside of that, there's nothing else that is necessarily required to be in that March meeting. So you could have fewer items and do it that way as well.
Right. And I'm just going to diverge from the policy of not, and at the same time point out that the chat function is apparently still being used. In fact, the Somerset does have an ordinance which provides for a public hearing, as I understand it, should there be violations. I know that's off track, but when these chats occur, sometimes you just have to set them straight. Okay.
So while we mentioned briefly the budget and the discussion in March, may I just take a minute? I know it's a different topic entirely. Mm-hmm. But in the survey responses, we got a lot of comments on trash. Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask Niles to work with waste management and, potentially other contractors to figure out what are the cost implications would be of those options, so that we can have that, to discuss by March.
On a related note, I forgot to put this in my report. In June 30th is when the contract with Waste Management ends. So June 30th, 2021. So the one of the things I was going to bring up is simply just that we could do what I think happened last time, which is do a solicitation for quotes around trash, and we could provide contractors with various different options in that process to allow for them to tell us what they could do under the options that we discussed related to the annual survey. Does that make sense?
In June.
We can do it before then. I one of the things that I would suggest is that that might be something that we put on the agenda in leading up to that, whether it be in March or April or whatever, so that we have the solicitation go out for months in advance for that type.
I do think it's great to have multiple bids. I completely agree with that. For the initial discussion, it may be good to at least have some kind of a t-shirt size estimate on if we were to make changes.
Certainly.
What kind of an implication to the budget that would be.
That's fine. Yeah. No. I agree with that. I just wanted to put out what I was thinking, just so that you had it as well. So I can work on at least asking Waste Management and looking at a couple of things in terms of their costs and looking at a couple of other people, but also going through that formal process of solicitation for invitation to bid process.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so at this point, it looks like we could likely have a very, certainly a comparatively less packed agenda for March, and we could have our public forum then. Or I suppose the alternative would be to to schedule another one in the interim. So
I think we should do it in March because we've done it that way historically. There's been plenty of opportunity to provide feedback. If there's new comments from the residents, certainly the council would always love to hear those, right? Like we've discussed at length the comments that have been received so far. So March would actually provide a longer amount of time to provide those comments.
Right. Good.
I think the community would appreciate that, because I just want to, clarify that while the ordinance itself has been out there for a while, the research from Ron has been introduced relatively recently. So I think the more time to have comments and discuss, perhaps even suggest hybrid ideas and solutions, would be a good thing. Thanks.
Okay, I'm really sorry to have to do this again, but with that chat, it's like the real-time fact-checking on MSNBC. Somerset's ordinance really doesn't apply only to financial impropriety, I believe. Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it applies to a lack of neutrality by election officials. And that's very important and pertinent in our case. So
yeah, and the council could return to the election plan if it's ready to do so. I've had an opportunity to read it.
Thank you.
I think it is ready for adoption tonight, I would just propose one minor change to the plan for the 2021 election document. Right now, it begins with the sentence "if." I would just suggest deleting the word "if," so that it would say, due to the declared emergency, and we could add, as extended by the governor by proclamation dated today, January 21, 2021. And then strike the phrase, including in-person voting scheduled for May 13, 2021. With those three amendments, it could be adopted right now. So the council could entertain a motion to amend the plan for 2021.
With those three amendments.
Yes.
Do we have a motion?
I will so move to amend the election plan as suggested.
And a second?
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So,
Thanks, folks. I guess I'm the lone wolf. The only reason why I'm not in favor is because I actually was in favor of, I think, Todd's original suggestion was we did make the decision about the all mail-in, which is great. But even if it's a few comments, the idea of making and putting those comments in while we're in a meeting, I like to really think things through. So, I mean, personally, and again, you voted already, but I would like to see it in writing so I could absorb it. I don't see any real rush considering we made the decision to do the all mail-in. So I would have preferred to have gone to Todd's original suggestion was, let's make whatever edits and we could perhaps adopt it at another meeting once we had more time. So I vote no. Thank you.
do you not have the text with you
I don't.
so that you can't? Okay.
I don't see it. So I would have appreciated, again, Todd's suggestion is let's put it down and circulate it. I just don't see a rush of why we have to do it all within one sitting. I mean, even if you send it and yeah, so.
They need a timeline. They need certainty, and we need to get moving on it, I believe.
I agree, and that's why it was great to have the all mail-in, and I applaud everyone. And
But I do think we have the votes, right? So we can move on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go
We
for
have
it.
the vote. Yep. Oh, good. Okay.
But please circulate that so that I could read it more carefully and thoughtfully. Thanks. You could even put it in the chat if you want. Thanks.
No, not in the chat, please.
I'm not allowed to use the chat.
Yeah, chat's off limits, please, because then I'll have to be fact checking instead of moving things along. Okay, that's the authoritarian in me. Next, we will look at the discussion of potential changes to the tree ordinance.
Okay, let me get it up.
Arthur.
Yeah, we've gone over this. People have had a chance to look at it. It was discussed at the forum last week. Let me just make two or three quick points. There are two purposes for this. One is to bring Martin's Addition, make it consistent with the county. And instead of the money, if you're having a large development project, instead of the fees going to the county, they would go to the village. The second reason is to encourage, to provide an incentive to plant trees and not to take down trees. Some people have said if you're building a $2 million house and the cost of taking down a tree is $750, it's not going to deter you. But if you're putting in a swimming pool or have other reasons to get a sediment control permit, you may want to consider it. And Tiffany has raised an excellent point in both conversation. I'll remind people that use the telephone if you want to talk to a council member. It's quite effective. That the county analyst of the tree canopy noted 5 years ago that Martin's Addition was not a net loser of tree canopy because as trees were coming down, other trees were getting larger and growing. But in order for that to work, the trees have to be there. And so encouraging plantings and discouraging taking trees down is part of the long-term health of the overall tree canopy. So with that, we've had a month or so to talk about it. It was discussed at the forum. Arguments for it and against it were included with the ordinance. I will leave it there for any more discussion.
Arthur, maybe you said this and I didn't comprehend. I understand that there hasn't really been any subsequent research on whether or not we've lost tree canopy since that 2015.
No, that was based on aerial photography done with a special kind of LiDAR radar. And there was a contractor hired by the county to analyze that, and that has not been done since. Okay. But we do know that there has been more large-scale, much of the loss comes from large-scale building projects, not by homeowners chopping down their trees, but in building a 3,500, 4,000 square foot house to the maximum that the village allows. And that's where the trees tend to come down. Now, I have to say, if we look at substantial canopy trees, there have not been many. There have been a few, and it's kind of devastating when you see them come down. Most are scrub trees that are not all that valuable. That looks horrible when you see the clear-cut lot. The bulldozer having come down and removed every bit of foliage. One of the members of our tree committee was a developer, and he faulted his fellow developers for saying that's the easiest thing to do. To move the backhoes around, you don't have to look, you just clear cut it and get done with it. But in terms of substantial canopy trees, there are only a handful that we can identify over the course of the years. But I still think that this acts as a deterrent and provides funds for our own tree program. Go ahead.
Anyone else? I would really love to have a little more input on how necessary this really is in just following all those great recommendations of our residents to really assess the situation. And especially this would seem to be less urgent, for example, than some policies that have been sidelined. So I would like more study on this before we really proceed.
What kind of study?
I'd like to chime in if I can. This is Monty. I think we had a collective email going where a number of council members were on it, a ton of residents, and a lot of residents were voicing their opinion about the ordinance and saying how they were adamantly opposed to it. I myself, as a realtor in real estate, I went back 5 years, looked across all of Martin's Edition, all the sales, all the builders that bought houses, tore them down, put up new houses, and I gave proof in this email. I think Arthur was on it, Niles was on it. There's one particular house which is right across from Martin's Edition's office, which is on Brookville, corner of Brookville and Turner. That particular house, I believe that was built in, I'm going from memory, 2007, somewhere around there, 2006. They had taken down some trees, but they planted a ton of oaks, a whole line of oaks along Brookville, and then they maintained some of the mature oaks. And there was another one further up on the corner of Cummings and Brookville that planted something like 12 to 15 large evergreens. So I think the idea that builders come in and just clear cut everything and never replant is foolish. And I provided proof for that. And I hate to be blunt, but this is the honest truth. And I think this ordinance is ridiculous. I think a lot of our residents have voiced that via an email that a lot of us were on. And I think, we need to let people have their own freedom to manage their own properties. I know personally, when I bought my own house on Turner Lane, I had a dead forest in my backyard. Yes, I took it all down. There was one tree that was still living, which is a magnolia, which is still there. I've since then, with the help of the tree canopy resolution, I put up, I think, 7 trees on my property, and I've just over 5,000 square feet. So I think, we need to start listening to residents, and I think to back up Jeff, to have more communication, better communication. That's just how I feel about it. I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I did acknowledge that if you look at the number of actual big trees that have come down, there aren't that many, but the handful does create a major stir.
And just anecdotally, I mean, just from observation, it seems that most people would not want to buy a new home that's been clear cut and not had any trees restored. So I think it's very well intended. I certainly applaud the intention, but I would just like to have a bit more input.
Good.
And again, as Monty did mention, I think we underestimate, just based upon the attendance at some of these meetings where a select group of people are very motivated. We can read from the listserv that, there's a very strong but silent majority, or at least an equally strong contingent who have opposite views, and a lot of people just won't ever opine, but really oppose some of these things. Some things that seem to be universally accepted or adopted or advocated, I should say. So
I would like to leave this on the table and perhaps bring it back and amend it at another time.
I would just like to quickly add that I do have concern, and that concern agrees with what we've heard tonight, with limiting the current residents' options for addressing trees on their property. I think it's one thing to try to address the builder clear cutting, whether that's happening or not, we can talk more about, but for most part, I would say that most residents would not want to clear cut their own property. I just have concern about that. I think we should really try to distinguish and look at other options to ensure that residents like the rest of us are not as heavily impacted by the proposed ordinance.
Okay.
And this is Jeff. I'm just going to make this real short. I just want to commend Susan for recognizing, that there are times where it's good to put things in neutral and get more feedback. And the other thing is, and again, I know it's on the table and it's not meant to be a controversial statement. It's just putting it out there, is perhaps, there are some processes or things to think about. Like you mentioned, the silent majority, and, are we really getting the good representative sample to help inform us? And maybe sometimes when we have these things come up, we could even, have them come up for community adoption, like at an election or something like that, because then you're assured that you're going to have the greatest turnout of residents to actually vote on something that might affect all of them. Thanks. Over.
Yeah, recognizing that we do have a representative democracy. Okay, and now we are discussing the ordinance process, and I'm not sure, Niles, who is leading this discussion.
So this was Arthur. Arthur, you'd submitted the brief little description about explanations.
Right. Arthur?
He's muted right now, so just give him a second. You're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted, but I lost my picture. I'm still here. Okay, this came up a couple of months ago when we were talking about making it a regular procedure to explain any new ordinances. Todd started this off on the ethics ordinance, and it was a great idea. And I just wanted to make it a regular policy, and so wrote up this one paragraph thing that proposed ordinances shall be accompanied by an explanation. The one question that has been raised about this, and I suggested that it includes arguments against the proposal. And one or two people, when I was drafting the tree proposal, said, why do we have to promote the arguments against? Let other people do that. I said, well, if we're coming up with a proposal, we should try to come up beforehand with alternatives, why it might be a bad idea. And this is the job that legislative analysts often do in legislatures before a proposal or legislation is adopted. They provide for the legislators a document that says, this is what this is all about. Here's the problems. Here's what some people say. Here's what other people say. So in one paragraph, I'm trying to do that. And in fact, we have more or less done this informally. I just wanted to make this a formal part of our process.
Okay, thank you.
And Arthur, I want to commend you. I think it's a really good step in the right direction. And again, I think it's something that we learned a lot from all the hard work with Todd and the members of the ethics committee where these things had come out, and even our experience with the sign ordinance. And I think the only thing I put on the table, I'm not sure if this is a work in progress or what have you, but I would consider, some thoughtfulness again, not to be a broken record, but around these forums, because, for example, I just put it out there and make this very short. We just had, I thought, a really good discussion with Ron around these different options, but I have a feeling that the residents would have loved to have participated in that. This is really the first time that they've had that real detailed discussion, but they're not allowed to participate. So I think, there should be some of that thoughtfulness around great problems are presented and options are presented, but we also want to give opportunities for the residents to engage in those thoughtful discussions. Thanks.
Okay, so at this point, anyone else want to discuss this policy, proposed policy? And if not, are we just going to consider it for a while and not take action tonight?
Hey, is this something we have to vote on? I mean, I think we all agree that there's pluses to this.
It's a policy, yeah. We can just vote on it.
So I mean, vote on it, or just say let's make sure this becomes a part of our practice. Either way.
I have one question. I put together in 10 minutes this little paragraph. If there is anyone wanted to amend it, suggest alternatives, any edits to it, perhaps we can let it take a look at it and see if you want to edit it, modify it in any way.
And of course, I would really like to get a little bit of legal input to see if there's anything else we might, that with the benefit of Ron's experience with other jurisdictions and just legal expertise, would want to add to this.
So I would like to set it off for a formal adoption next month, with the opportunity to get legal advice and anyone's willingness to edit, review, change, adopt, amend.
For formal introduction?
Yeah, for formal adoption.
Because it is not a regulation, this is just a process. It doesn't need to be.
It doesn't have to be introduced, but.
Right, you can just vote on it.
But we would like to get some input from Ron, right?
And
I would.
Any other council member.
And yeah, of course, other council members. Okay, so, all right.
Okay.
We'll wait. Okay, discussion of a potential safety committee or task force.
Great. So why don't I pose the question? I see Mark is here, which I'm grateful for. And, you know, this was a co-introduction between residents and myself. And I know that we've gone through this thoughtfully now several times at the council meetings, the last one and this one, and also at the interim during the listening forum. So maybe just for both sake of time, and respect for both who are still here, residents and council members, where or how do we get to go? What can we do? What can Mark Ian do? Do you want us to go through things again? Do we have enough information to take a vote? What do you suggest so we're economical and thoughtful with your time?
You could make a motion, but you might want to have a discussion first. I think it's advisable to have a discussion amongst the council members and see how they feel about this proposal. There are two or even three possible forms this might take. You suggested a safety committee, a task force has also been mentioned. And at one point, I think you mentioned sort of, tonight even Mark mentioned, I forget how it was stated, an informal residence committee or residence group or something that's less formal and less official, which would not trigger some of those concerns about council and village liability. So I think, you know, there are different forms it could take.
Okay, I would like to suggest one possibility to move forward on this is to set up a committee right now with a limited time frame, say 6 months.
That would be a task force.
Okay, if that's what we call it, a task force.
Right.
To look into what might be needed, a statement of needs. And I'm going to say right now, I am stealing an idea from Naomi Nyerman. I only plagiarize from the best sources. And she says this would be very typical of setting up this kind of a committee. What's missing? What are the needs? What do people feel that they would like to have in terms of, say, crime? What is the level of crime? I mentioned before when we ended up with the police, it did not meet a cost-benefit standard, but it did satisfy people and added to their comfort. So, you know, we are likely to want to have a comfort blanket, but do we need a comfort duvet? You know, what level do we want to go to in providing comfort? And we don't know that until we get a sense of what is it that the community feels it needs out there? What's missing? What could a committee do? And, you know, what are the interactions? And I think of this, perhaps I shouldn't say that. Anyway, I would say, I would favor setting up a group, a task force with a limited time period now to go out and make this kind of assessment and then come back with either, you know, single set of suggestions like the walkability committee is going to do, and then perhaps continue them if there are long-term projects or turn it into a long-term permanent committee. But right now I'm uncomfortable with what we know. And I think it's a great opportunity to go out there and set up something to learn about it.
So I have a different, a little bit different perspective. Is I really like this idea, and I like it from the standpoint of, you know, I think it was Mark who described it as kind of a clearinghouse. And I can't remember whether you did that tonight, Mark, or whether you did that at the forum. But a clearinghouse of information. You know, we don't have, you know, obviously we're a very small staff, and they, you know, they don't have bandwidth to really do everything that we might want to do in terms of garnering information and then being able to communicate that information. So I love the idea of you know, a body, and not worried yet about whether we're calling committee, task force, or whatever, that has as its aegis the ability to do that. Go out, find you know, get the information and make sure it gets communicated. And that's, you know, health and safety are the obviously two crime, whatever, are two of the big things. The only thing this thing that I struggled with as I read through what you, Mark, and Jeff wrote was wanting to see a little bit more guardrails on that. And I think that's where you were headed a little bit, Mark, when you spoke this evening about what the authority was for this group compared, what would you be doing on your own versus doing it under the aegis of a government committee, of a municipal committee, the council. And that was really what I wanted to just see, is to make sure that the line of the connection between council and this body was clear, that this is a committee that's being created by council. It's a part of the municipal government. And it's not an autonomous group that goes out and makes its own recommendations to the cops as to what they should be doing, that kind of thing. Those are the kinds of things that trouble me. Not that you're talking with the police, but that those kinds of things occur that don't go through the council. But overall, I like the idea. I don't, there's something there. It probably needs tweaking, as Arthur said, and as you guys I'm sure would agree. So, but I think that we've seen enough, between crime stuff and safety stuff to say, yeah, we got to do something here. So I commend you both for fleshing this out.
So to move forward, do we need some kind of a mission statement like we've had for the walkability or the tree committee, what we expect and what time period, or how should we move forward on this?
We would need all of that before we could proceed. We would first need to determine if everyone is in agreement that we think we're there now, I think, wouldn't we?
There, you mean, do we have a statement ready to go?
That we're sufficiently satisfied that this is something that will go forward, that there is a majority of council members who want to explore in some form, and then that would be up for a vote.
Right. Well, yeah, I for one would like to see something go forward. A task force right now with a time period, say, of 6 months, to put together a needs assessment. What could they do? Propose? What could they do as a continuing activity? What would make sense to do, given the resources and so on? Unless Todd has another idea. You're mute, Todd. You're mute.
I don't enough to know. I'm mute. So no, I want to move forward with this, and I'm at a loss to say how do we do that. I want to give them time to kind of fine tune and address some of these issues, but I also want to give I'd love them to start saying, okay, here's the kinds of things we're talking about, and we can communicate and gather. So I kind of want to do both at the same time. This is my.
In the meantime, I think we do need to have at least another update from our police officers before we go much further. At maybe next meeting, depending on time. But
so what do we want to give as our direction on this?
So that's what I'm asking. Does everyone want to take a vote on whether we get a little bit more clarity? I mean, we could just.
I'd like to make a motion, and maybe that's what Jeff is already doing. So sorry, that we form something that's safety related, that we want something. We're in agreement that we do, and that they come back with more information based on what they've just heard.
Okay, do you have
They could come back with a proposed charter.
with a proposed charter or mission statement? Right.
If, thanks, folks. This is really good discussion, and I'm glad that we're seeing a way forward. I just want to, Mark, I wasn't sure if it's okay. I just want to see if Mark had comment. I saw a couple of times he might have wanted to, and if not, I'm happy to just respond real quickly. But Mark, was there anything that you wanted to add to this?
First of all, I greatly appreciate the fact that there's been a positive response to the proposal. I also greatly respect the fact that there is a concern about some of the detail. So what I'd like to be able to do is get guidance. I mean, all I heard was we'd like more information and a mission statement. The scope of work was really a mission statement, and it was patterned after mission statement. So we're happy to like do the work, but we need some more detail as to what that work should be, and we're going to need help from you all.
I was told in the Army by a good sergeant, never volunteer for anything. But I will volunteer to take your statement that you have. You can send me a Word document, not the PDF, and convert that into a mission statement for a task force, say for a 6-month period to come back and to start pulling things together. 6 months, a period that sounds good. I mean, 6 months is, one of those numbers that happens to be half a year. But if anyone wants to do 4.5, I'll be fine with that. So I will volunteer to do that.
I would ask that that you all consider sending me emails with specific questions, and that way I can get a better understanding of what I'm trying to do. I'm happy to do it.
I'll take your statement and convert that into a mission statement from the council.
Okay.
Let me run through a draft of it and see how that goes, and we can move on from there. Does that sound good? It's not like looking at the table. Todd, I'm looking in your direction. Susan, I'm looking in your direction, and you can't see where I'm looking.
No idea.
So
I think a draft. Sure.
I'll give you guys my, some of the things that triggered my concerns when I saw that language. I'll get that to you guys as well, which will hopefully help.
Now, if we're going to do a needs assessment, that basically involves doing a survey in the community, right? So what would that process look like?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
So can I just jump in here? So we'd done a survey for the walkability task force, if you recall, last summer. So we could do basically what we did there, which is the walkability task force came up with questions that they wanted to ask residents. And then we simply used the village resources, constant contact primarily, to distribute that to everyone, and everybody could send their feedback in. And that was quite successful. We got 192 responses on that survey. So that is definitely something that is not that difficult to pull off from a logistics point of view, but is something that could be part of that needs assessment.
Right? That sounds great.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, let me look at your statement. I'll do something from your statement. I'm not going to invent something, and try to put it in the framework that the council could then approve and move forward with it.
This sounds great, and I'll work with you all on it. But I think my only concern is that the misinformation out about COVID and getting vaccinations right now is disheartening. People are going to get shots after they've been given appointments and then told they can't have it for policy. It was different from what the mayor said, the executive said, the governor said, and was even in the newspapers. I mean, and it's becoming a real problem and frustrating people. But Councilman Friedson,
yeah,
he gives really straight answers on this. So it would be really helpful to maybe test drive the idea. Think about this, to try to get that data out and just see what our clearinghouse would look like with one example.
Go try it.
Okay.
And
I think somebody has to tell me how
Right.
we want the clearinghouse to distribute the information, which is that we can have that.
Niles, you're trying to say something.
Well, okay, so I can say something. So one thing I want to say is that we do, in the weekly wrap-up, include information related to COVID, and including the county's vaccination page. That's a link in the weekly wrap-up. We can make that more prominent, bold it, whatever we need to do. The other thing that I was thinking of including in the wrap-up, and this came up with a call with Councilmember Friedson, was last Tuesday, they had done a virtual forum about the vaccination process. There's a YouTube link to that entire forum.
Yep.
And I can get that and put that in the weekly wrap-up as well. So that's another piece of information that can be it's just a link that we can easily get out to people. Okay?
That's fantastic. And then the other thing I would suggest you consider is some seniors can't work computers or don't have them.
So we do.
And do we have a volunteer process to help them set up their appointments?
That's a good question for the county has been, so the county through the state manages this whole process. Okay. So the state, and it's actually governed by federal law, as we found out today. So the whole thing is federal, state, local. I know there's also another link that came up in this call was, how you can help. There's a page on how you can help that the county has put out related to it. It's primarily for people with medical backgrounds, but we can look in that and see if they have, and we can share that link as well to how to get involved. So that might be a way of seeing how people can get help with appointments and that kind of thing. Again, this is something that, because it is a county state issue, it's how the village can help is a very different question. Do you see what I'm saying? Because of
yes,
we don't distribute anything.
That's why I've come up with a clearinghouse idea. All we can do is share information.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What we want to do is share curated information.
Yeah.
I mean, the information about shots over the last 2 weeks has gone in 6 different directions, and maybe that's the way it's going to be, and people have to come to terms with that. But at least they should know that we're trying to get the information to them.
And I think one of the things we can do, and as I just said, is share these links again with the county, make them a little bit more prominent. You can also, on our homepage on the website, there is a link to the county page. We can make that, add, the vaccination link directly, that could be updated. So things like that. So that's the sort of the approach that I would say.
I'm getting a little too aggressive in this conversation. I apologize. But what about some of these things where the information changes daily?
So that's why I try to, as much as possible, do links. I try not to make the wrap-ups when it's not our information. I try to do links as much as possible, because that's been my concern. We share the CDC guidance, but the CDC guidance has changed at least twice over the last few months, to which our information gets out of date. So that's why I try to, as much as possible, include links, because there's an element to all of this where we end up with, we have to be reliant on someone else, right? Whether it's the county, whether it's the CDC or whatever. So sharing links that they are updating, and I try to do that as much as possible, of trying to get the links that they are updating. That's I think the way we can at least get it to be as most relevant or evergreen as we can get it, considering this is not our
and my last point would be standing up some entity could actually take some of that burden off of you or support you. Okay, I'm done.
Thanks. I know it's a long evening. I promise this is very quick. Again, I just want to thank all, and it looks like we've got a way forward, and really appreciate that. And the one piece I just add to this is the convening piece that I think gives folks comfort to come together and discuss things that are focused on the safety piece. So maybe we figure out, as part of this survey, it's not just a doodle poll or something, but we can also layer in the idea that we'd have some convening, that would focus on the safety and other things, so that it triangulates that, just so folks feel that there is a forum and that they can come there and they can, express their opinions beyond.
I want to hear everybody's ideas, and we'll build it out slowly. and conservatively,
Yep.
as things make sense and consensus forms to do that.
Perfect.
I think that's a very wise approach, and I appreciate that you're willing to really consider the best way to implement it. I think that's most likely to yield the best success. If you look at what the Walkability Task Force has done, they've really been working incredibly hard and have come up with great suggestions, and I think the task force model could definitely serve you well. So thanks for your time.
And Mark, send me a Word version of the PDF that you sent out.
I will send you anything you ask.
Okay, that's it.
Wow.
And one more thing, whatever it is, and something else too.
That's all.
I'm kidding.
Okay.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, my wife's calling, I'm going.
Okay, lucky you. Okay, so
Well, I am, but I'll have to weather the explanation of having sat through this meeting for 3 hours, but it's not the first time, so.
good luck.
It'll work out. Bye-bye.
Bye. So now we are on to financial matters.
Oh, God. Yeah, we're doing good. We're going to have some budget amendments next month. We're a little overspending in a few categories, salaries, because we hired, she just disappeared.
Yeah,
Oh,
she's
Martha, there she is. And we're spending a little bit more on our cyber account because we are taking the advice of our cybersecurity people. And next month we'll have a better idea of how much we're going to have to adjust the budget. But we're also underrunning a lot of others. So there's not an overall problem, just the usual thing
offsetting.
come out as you thought a year ago.
So
You go ahead.
Jump in 1 second. When you talk about cybersecurity, maybe this is more of a question for Niles, is that I work with a lot of school districts, and Baltimore County Public Schools was just victimized by ransom, and they lost everything.
Oh, wow.
So I know that was one of the things we wanted our resource to work on protecting us.
Right.
Have we done that?
Yes. So as we've been implementing, as we talked about previously, 3 different sets of backups. So there's a cloud backup solution, a manual backup solution that is kept on site, and then a off-site manual thing that gets updated periodically, so that we have the data in various different places, and that 2 of the 3 of them are not always connected, and so on, so that we are securing our data as much as possible and trying to make it as clear as possible. That's part of going to what Arthur is talking about overages, is making sure that our IT contractor has the hours to perform these backups in a way that is efficient. So we had to work, when we did the initial backups a few months ago, that took a lot of time to set up all of these different things in the most appropriate way. Now that we've done that, it's more efficient now, and so not only are we backing up more, we're backing up more efficiently. And so that will lead to reduced costs down the road, but part of this was the initial cost of getting these backups in place and doing them the right way. Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Yes, and Todd, if I learned from this, I have a backup on my computer that I unplug every night. I back it up every night and unplug it and put it in a separate cabinet. If we're hit by a nuclear bomb, it's all lost. But if my computer catches fire and the backup attached to it, I'll be safe. So I learned something from that cybersecurity review.
All right, good, Arthur. So I'll sleep better at night knowing that, Arthur.
That's right.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Arthur. Niles, if you're ready for your report.
Yep. So I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly. So just as an overview, we're working on some policies and procedures updates for the office. Martha has been working on documenting things, making sure that we understand where we are between the 2 of us as we're growing and seeing things that need to be documented. With the committee support, myself and Ron did an orientation for Anna Meehan for the election committee, so she's all good to go, so they can start there. Also, with support with the Community Engagement Committee, as we talked about way back at the beginning of this meeting, and also with the walkability, doing support and some research and talking to other jurisdictions related to walkability was one of the things that the office did in the last month. The holiday fund, we've already distributed the checks to our workers. Thank you to everyone who contributed. That went very well. The village directory is out, and I really want to take this opportunity to thank Martha. She did a lot of work taking everything that we had done and previous staff had done and things like that, and to get it into the form that we needed. This takes a lot of time. It's a lot of effort, and I want to make that point just for to say to Martha, and that it's out. And so far,
Thank you, Niles.
you're welcome. And just to point out that it's out. If people, so far I haven't heard anyone who didn't receive it in the village, but if you didn't receive the directory, there are a few extras, so just let the office know. So in RFPs, we had 2 that closed since the last meeting. The tree care and the municipal operations. Both we received multiple bids for. 5 for the tree supervisor, or the tree care and arborist one. 3 for the municipal operations. For the municipal operations, only 1 satisfied really all of the requirements of the RFP, which is Blue Crab Contracting, who we already contract with, and my recommendation is simply to continue with them. That is what we got. On the arborist, as I said, there were 5, 3 of which didn't fulfill our requirements. That was whether it be they were far away and distant, the cost was not what the village has anticipated in the past, or something like that. 2, Integrated Plant Care, our current contractor, and Mulherron tree experts fit with that. Arthur and Monty sat in on an interview with them. We talked to references. And so what I say is the 2 are equivalent on cost and equivalent in where they are positioned in the village, so access to the village for emergencies and so on. So the recommendation there is to go with for the council to decide to go with one or the other. So that is what I would say there. But I will say that this was very successful in terms of getting bids, and that compared to previous bid processes was a success. So in 2019, when the arborist was sent out, we only got 1 response. As I said, this time we got 5. So that, I think, is a success on that front.
Right, thank you. And do we need to vote on Blue Crab at this point? It's over 10,000.
Yes, so the council has to say yes to direct us to execute a contract with them.
So we vote to, who would like to make a motion to have Niles execute a contract with Blue Crab?
We'll so move to make a contract with Blue Crab Consulting.
Thanks.
Second.
Todd?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. So that one is done. And now, did you have anything further, Niles?
No, that was all. That concludes my report.
Okay. All right. So then we're ready for more resident comments, if any.
Larry Watson has his hand up.
Okay, Larry.
Unmute, Larry.
So, Niles.
Yes.
In the walkability, where one of the concepts is just trying to get the 4 feet of right of way at the curb cleared enough that people could walk in that path, right? So imagine my chagrin when a village tree was planted 12 inches off the curb. So they don't seem to have any guidelines as to where to plant them.
So first of all, I understand that, and I think that is something that involves some further investigation about those processes and the performance of contractors. What I'll say is that in terms of one thing that I want to check is what I want to follow up on one thing related to the code and what it says regarding the planting of trees, because I want to make sure that we already start with what we know, and then we can say whether we need a more formal process. This goes back to sort of what I was saying at the beginning of my report, making sure it's clear when and where people have this, because I do think that there needs to be some clear guidelines with these certain things. So let me look into it a little bit more, and I can discuss that more.
And the other thing real quick is, there's this thing about, what is it, 3 out of 5 trees fail in the first 2 years or something?
Mm-hmm.
But what I've been looking at that, and it seems that we're not getting, they're not being put in deep enough. The ones that I see dying have been too much mulch and not enough embedment of the root structure into the soil.
Again, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. Let me just do a little bit more of the research on some of those specifics, and so that I can give you a more concrete answer there. Okay?
Great, thanks. Does anyone have questions for the council?
Yes, I do.
Or comments?
I do.
Okay.
Okay. First, I would like to say that I thank you for the respectful tone of this meeting. I think that is much appreciated by everyone. And I also want to thank you for moving forward, at least in some fashion, to get the safety committee up and running, the safety task force maybe in the interim. And I want to thank you for voting to have the election by mail. I think that is essential. I think we all agree. And I also want to tell Arthur that I appreciate the work on the tree ordinance. I thought that was a very smart solution you came up with to tie it to the sediment permits. And I appreciate your thoughtfulness in that process. And I hope that I know it got tabled tonight, but I hope it goes forward. On the elections, there's a concern in terms of the firewall between the staff and council on the one hand and the independent election committee on the other hand. The way that the plan and ordinance changes have been written up from the election committee this year kind of blur that distinction in a way that is not helpful. For example, the voter roll has to be certified by the election officials, not by the staff. You don't want your staff controlling your voter roll. Although staff has been very useful in putting the raw data together, it's the election committee that has the authority to certify that. And the same is true on the election vote counting. It's not enough to have an employee of the council, namely a contractor, do a voting report. That has to be certified separately by an independent election committee. And there's a certification process in print. I mean, we've had 5 years of good processes here, and it's all written up on how you certify the election, what that process involves, how you verify the valid envelopes. That has to be done by the election committee, not just the contractor. And any non-conforming ballots have to be reviewed by the election committee, and they make the decision on that adjudication, not the contractor. So there's a role here that needs to be defined very clearly. And last year, I mean, we had only 6 weeks to put together the mail voting thing, and it worked remarkably well. But there was some muddying of the waters, shall we say, in terms of that firewall, which really needs to be a clear, red, bright line of what are election official responsibilities, like certification of votes and voter rolls, versus what is a staff support function. The election committee, for example, is responsible for the communications about the elections. That's not something where staff writes up the election communications. That's an election official responsibility. And so what I did last June was write up a sort of 2-page description of what the mail voting procedure should look like, including requirements for the contractor. And I will provide that document to the council probably this weekend, because tomorrow's kind of jammed. And also, the other piece I want to mention about elections is that Frank Carell and I were both very concerned about the lack of public discussion of these changes in the committee meetings that were held. There were only 2 committee meetings held by the election committee, and they were both very general. Neither of them talked about the specific election mechanics. And of course, you all know that to have fair, honest elections, you really need to look at the details on the process. And so I will send you the letter that Frank and I were writing just before he died. I'm getting misty here. I miss him so much. But Frank cared about good, clean elections as much as I do and as much as you all do. I know that, and I was always happy to have his input. from when I first followed his footsteps as chair of the election committee for these past many years. And I will send you Frank's letter that he and I were writing just before he died, to make sure that his concern does get communicated to you. So I'll send you those 2 documents.
Okay, thank you. I'm really glad that you brought up that certification document because I have a lot of questions about it and I will be following up on that with you. So thank you very much for your comments. And if there's not anyone else,
Lynn Welly is here.
Audience, Lynn?
Yes. Going back to the COVID discussions, I'm in the 1B priority group. On January 15th through Chevy Chase Home, they provided a link to pre-register, which I did. Today, I received registration confirmation by email, and it came from an address at montgomerycountymaryland.gov. And the address was a bunch of letters, which, you know, and I'm always very concerned about scams. So I went back to the director of Chevy Chase Home, who confirmed that it was a valid response, not spam or some scammer. So I'm satisfied that was a legitimate confirmation. Then later on this evening, just within the last couple hours while this meeting was going place, I also received a text message confirming my pre-registration. I would like to share, if possible, that identifications. I could just forward the email to Niles, and then he could pick out of that what he considers legitimate and put out with the community with whether else he planned to put out. Just so that when people start to get these confirmations, they'll have a reference to compare to.
Yes, you can send me that email. I can look at it just to see what might be pertinent. As I sort of said before, trying to go through what the county has officially said and things like that is the priority. And so if it's from the county, at least I can look at that. I know there was some residents in another jurisdiction had questions about what they were receiving from the county when they pre-registered. So maybe getting a declarative statement, which is something that was discussed with Councilmember Friedson today, about some of these questions might help as well. And so if we get access to that from them, we can share that as well. So I will, but if you'd like to send me the email, obviously redacting personal information or anything, you would like that is fine. Okay?
All right, I'll forward it to you, and I'm satisfied that having it receiving the okay from the director of Chevy Chase Home that it's a legit response. Number 2 on the COVID thing, and Dr. Fauci says wear a mask. Most health experts say wear a mask. I just have a question. I walk pretty much on a daily basis. I just don't understand why people are outside not wearing a mask. Runners, bicyclers, walkers. I'm of a certain age and generation and mentality, which might be different than other ages and mentalities, but I know this is not a council question and a VMA question, but for general discussion as far as public safety, it just sort of blows my mind that people are not wearing a mask when they're out walking.
Okay, agreed.
And maybe this can be part of a discussion with regard to the safety task group.
Right.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you and good night. Oh, and I want to say thank you for hanging in there for this ungodly amount of time you have tonight and bearing up through all of this.
Thank you. We have a few hardcore people here.
I appreciate all your good efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. That's very nice of you. Much appreciated.
Good night. You all have a good night's sleep. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Do we have any additional comments? If not, that will conclude the open part of our meeting, and the council will now entertain a motion in open session to enter into a closed session in accordance with section 3-305B1 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss the appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom this public body has jurisdiction. Any other personnel matter that affects one or more specific individuals.
I so move.
Second? Jeff? Seconds? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, so we will now enter into closed session.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
So we'll just give just a second here.
Yeah, till everybody.